about 370 million indigenous people around the world, and indigenous people are folks like American Indians or Mayans in Guatemala or Maasai people in Kenya. And it's hard to talk about indigenous people as a group because it's really thousands of small different groups, but what they are united by is facing a set of common problems, which are often environmental problems. Often indigenous people live in places where there are vast wealth of resources that companies and governments want to exploit, whether it be oil or gold or water. And often indigenous people don't have a lot of power within the government that governs the territory where they've lived for hundreds or thousands of years. There's increasing pressure for extractive industries. Absolutely. I mean, there's a shorter and shorter supply of all sorts of minerals and so forth. I mean, just here in Guatemala, there's lots of gold mining. There's a huge nickel mine here. There's plans for an enormous string of iron ore mines along the south coast. So yeah, there's increasing pressure. I mean, as development happens everywhere, as more and more people buy cars in places like India and China, we need more and more iron and petroleum to fuel those things, and those minerals and petroleum are usually underneath land that's traditionally inhabited by indigenous people. So when we talk about large-scale development, we're usually talking about large-scale development at the expense of indigenous people somewhere. Whether it's constructing a large dam to power a city, many times constructing a large dam is flooding the traditional territory of some indigenous group. If we're talking about mining for minerals that will go into making this camera or the computer that you're watching this on, often we're talking about getting rare minerals that are found often under the territory of indigenous people, and that in itself isn't always automatically a problem. The problem is how these projects get implemented, where when a government or a company finds these minerals or finds the oil, they exploit it, they sell the rights to using it, usually without consulting the indigenous people, without cutting them in on the profits. They just go in and take the land and drill the wells and destroy the area without bringing any benefits or very few benefits to the indigenous people. And worse, usually they pretend that they are bringing benefits to the indigenous people. Usually they pretend that they are paying the indigenous people for their land or providing schools or providing education. But usually it's from a perspective, a very colonial perspective. So it's let's provide education for these indigenous people, but certainly not in their own language or in their own town. Usually the benefits are only construed as benefits if you're coming from the perspective of the best thing for the indigenous people is that they stop being indigenous and start being more like everybody else. And that's usually not what indigenous people want.
And what are you seeing as a response from the indigenous communities to this?
Community organizing. There are lots of examples of indigenous communities that have united and either cut better deals with government and industry to allow some extraction of raw materials from their land, or have organized to combat that exploitation when the mine or the dam or the cutting of the forest, when the indigenous people have decided that that's just not acceptable to them in any way, shape, or form. There are examples of communities that have successfully combated that.
And what is Cultural Survival doing in order to support those efforts?
Cultural Survival partners with indigenous communities who are engaged in campaigns to either stop a environmental threat in their community, or to gain more control, or more say over how their local resources get developed. Cultural Survival partners with those communities to leverage folks like you to help write letters and support indigenous people in those campaigns. So the campaigns are from the community. What we're doing is helping use outside support to bring more weight and more focus and more leverage to those campaigns.
Okay, how can people help?
People can go to our website and see what our current campaign is, see what indigenous people in specific communities have requested, and write a letter, write an email.